Washington, D.C. as a cause guy. I am a cause guy. I care deeply about this country and about the causes that make me, that I think are at the core of this country. And when I left the United States Senate, I got involved in causes that I believe in. I went and worked at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and wrote on the cause of Iran, and wrote and lectured all over this country. I got involved with a healthcare company. Why? Because I was afraid of what was going to happen, and I was asked by a healthcare company to be on their board of directors. Now, I don't know whether you think board of directors are lobbyists. They're not. That's the private sector experience that I'm sure that Mitt would approve of. I also worked for a coal company. As I mentioned the other day, my grandfather was a coal miner. I grew up in the coal region. And when I left the United States Senate, one of the big issues on the table was cap and trade and global warming, and I wanted to stay involved in the fray. So I contacted a local coal company from my area, and I said, look, I want to join you in that fight. I want to work together with you. I want to help you in any way I can to make sure we defeat cap and trade. And so I engaged in that battle, and I'm very proud to have engaged in that battle.
Congressman Paul, do you accept it?
Well, you know, it is true. I believe Congress should designate how the money should be spent. I agree with that. But the big difference between the way I voted and the senator voted is I always voted against the spending. I voted against all the spending. There's only been a couple appropriations bills I voted for in the past, 26 years I've been in Washington. So you're a big spender. That's all there is to it. You're a big government conservative. And you don't vote for, right to work and these very important things. And that's what weakens the economy. So to say you're a conservative, I think, is a stretch. But you've convinced a lot of people of it. But somebody has to point out your record.
I would convince. I think I have an opportunity to respond here. I've convinced a lot of people of it because my record is actually pretty darn good. I supported and voted for a balanced budget amendment, the line item veto. I voted, in fact, I used to keep track when I was in the United States Senate of all the Democratic amendments and all amendments that increase spending. I put on the board something called a spendometer. If you look at my spending record and you take all the, quote, spending groups, I was rated at the top or near the top every single year. I go back to the point. I am not a libertarian, Ron. I agree with you. You vote against everything. I don't vote against everything. I do vote for some spending. Okay, I do think government has a role to play, particularly in defense.
We'll let everybody get in here, but at first I wanted to bring in Governor Perry on this. And we'll stay on this subject. Don't worry about it.
I'll let you back in here, Ron.
You've called Senator Santorum the king.
I think you've just seen a great example of why I got in this race. Because I happen to think that I'm the only outsider, with the possible exception of John Huntsman, who has not been part of the problem in Washington, D.C. The insiders in Washington, D.C. We have to nominate someone that can beat Barack Obama, that can get the Tea Party behind them, that can go to Washington, D.C. and stop the corrupt spending that has been going on. And it doesn't make any difference whether you're an insider from Washington, D.C. or you're an insider from Wall Street. That is what Americans rightfully see is the real problem in America today. They want someone who has a record of executive governing experience, like I have in Texas. I've been the commander-in-chief of 20,000 plus troops that get deployed. I have been the governor of a state that has created 1 million net new jobs. That is a record that American people are looking for. That is what Americans are looking for, an outsider that is not corrupted by the process.
So, Governor, you're saying Congressman Paul is an insider?
I am telling you, anybody that has had as many, here's what frustrates me, is that you go get the earmarks and then you vote against the bill. Now, I don't know what they call that in other places, but Congressman Paul in Texas, we call that hypocrisy.
Well, I call it being a constitutionalist because I believe we should earmark or designate every penny. You designate weapon systems, you designate money to go to spend $1 billion on an embassy in Iraq. That's an earmark too. I say that Congress has more responsibility. But this thing, back to Senator Santorum, he ducks behind this. He's for this balanced budget amendment, but voted 5 times to increase the national debt by trillions of dollars. This is what the whole Tea Party movement is about. Quit. Government's practically stopped over increasing the national debt. You did it 5 times. So what's your excuse for that? That's trillions of dollars. You kept this thing going. You didn't do very much to slow it up when you had a chance.
As a matter of fact, I did do a lot to slow up when I had a chance. I was the author of the only bill that actually repealed a federal entitlement. welfare reform. I actually promoted and talked and tried to pass Social Security reform. I worked on Medicare and Medicaid. I was one of the only guys out there in a time, Ron, when we were running surpluses, that was out there talking about the need for long-term entitlement reform, which is where the real problem is. When the government runs up a tab and you don't have the money no longer to pay, then you have to increase the debt ceiling. But every time we tried to tie it with reducing spending. We're in a point right now where we've blown the doors off of it. And as you know, back in the last go-round, I stood up and say, no, we shouldn't increase the debt ceiling because we have gone too far. But routine debt ceiling increases have happened throughout the course of this country for 200 years.
If I can, I'd like to pivot and go to another topic here, which is the issue of commander-in-chief and national security. And Governor Huntsman, you have already said, for instance, that the Iranians have made the decision to go nuclear. You think they want a nuclear weapon. Tell us why you would be better as commander-in-chief than the other candidates on this stage.
Because being commander-in-chief is less about having the discussions that we've just heard a moment ago, a lot of insider gobbledygook, a lot of political spin. It's about leading organizations, it's about leading people, it's about creating a vision. And I've done that my entire career. I did that as governor. I took my state to the best managed state in America. I took that economy to the #1 position, #1 in job creation, as compared and contrasted with Massachusetts, which was number 47 during a time when I think leadership matters to the American people. But more than anything else, I believe that this nation is looking for not only leadership, but leadership that can be trusted. Because let's face it, we have a serious trust deficit in this nation. The American people no longer trust our institutions of power, and they no longer trust our elected officials. And I'm here to tell you that we must find not just a commander-in-chief, not just a president, not just a visionary, but we've got to find somebody who can reform Congress and do what needs to be done with respect to leading the charge on term limits. Everybody knows that Congress needs term limits. Everybody knows that we've got to close the revolving door that has corrupted Washington. And everybody knows as well that we've got to have someone who can deliver trust back to Wall Street, which has also lost the American people's trust.
Do you want to speak specifically about anyone on the stage?
They can all speak for themselves, but I can tell you, having served as governor successfully, the only person on this stage as well to have lived overseas 4 times. I've run 2 American embassies, including the largest and most complicated we have in the world, the United States Embassy in China. I think I understand better than anyone on this stage the complex national security implications that we will face going forward with what is, we all know, the most complex and challenging relationship of the 21st century, that of China.
Governor Romney?
You have a question, or shall I just...
My question is, the governor has just said that he thinks he can speak better than anyone else to these issues.
Well, he can do a lot better than Barack Obama, let's put it that way. We have a president who had no experience in leadership. He never led a business, never led a city, never led a state. And as a result, he learned on the job being president of the United States, and he has made one error after another relating to foreign policy, the most serious of which relates to Iran. We have a nation which is intent on becoming nuclear. Iran has pursued their ambition without having crippling sanctions against them. The president was silent when over 1 million voices took to the streets in Iran, voices he should have stood up for and said, we're supporting you. And he's failed to put together a plan to show Iran that we have the capacity to remove them militarily from their plans to have nuclear weaponry. Look, this is a failed presidency, and the issue in dealing with the responsibility of commander-in-chief is the issue of saying who has the capacity to lead. Who is someone who's demonstrated leadership capacity, who has character, shown that character over their career, who has integrity, and I hope, I mean, each of these people, I don't want to be critical of the people on the stage. Any one of these people would do a better job in many respects than our president. And I will endorse our nominee. I believe in the principles that made America such a great nation. This is a time when we're faced not with a nation that is extraordinarily secure in a very, very calm world. We're facing a very dangerous world. And we have a president now who unbelievably has decided to shrink the size of the military, who unbelievably has said, for the first time since FDR, we're going to no longer have the capacity to fight 2 wars at a time. This president must be replaced.
I want to bring in Josh now.
Yeah, I want to stay on the topic of commander-in-chief as well. Obviously, that puts you in charge of the most powerful armed forces in the world. Only 2 of you on stage have served in the military. Dr. Paul was a flight surgeon, Governor Perry a pilot. There are 25 million veterans in this country, 3 million currently serving active duty. So this question is very relevant to a large number of voters out there. And the question goes to you, Governor Perry. Do you believe having worn a uniform, been part of a unit, better prepares you for the job of Commander-in-Chief than those on the stage who haven't served?
No, I think it brings a very clear knowledge about what it requires for those that are on the front lines. But also, having been the governor of the state of Texas and been the commander-in-chief for 11 years there and 20,000 plus troops that we've deployed to multiple theaters of operation. But I want to go back to this issue that we just brought up earlier when we talked about one of the biggest problems facing this country. And Iran's a big problem, Senator, without a doubt. But let me tell you what this president is doing with our military budget is going to put our country's freedom in jeopardy. You cannot cut $1 trillion from the Department of Defense budget and expect that America's freedoms are not going to be jeopardized. That, to me, is the biggest problem that America faces, is a president that doesn't understand the military and a president who is allowing the reduction of the DOD budget so that he can spend money in other places, and it will put America's freedom in jeopardy.
We'll talk about the understanding of the military, and let's go to you, Speaker Gingrich. Recently, Dr. Paul referred to you as a chicken hawk because you didn't serve. Given what you just heard Governor Perry say about understanding the military and Dr. Paul's comments, how do you respond?
Well, Dr. Paul makes a lot of comments. It's part of his style. My father served 27 years in the Army in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. I grew up in a military family moving around the world. Since 1979, I've spent 32 years working, starting with the Army's Training and Doctrine Command. I was the longest-serving teacher in the senior military for 23 years. I served in the Defense Policy Board. But let me say something about veterans, because as an Army brat whose family was deeply engaged, I feel for veterans. We had a great meeting today in Wolfboro with veterans. And I made a commitment in New Hampshire that we would reopen the hospital in Manchester. We would develop a new clinic in the North Country using telecommunications. And we would provide a system where veterans could go to their local doctor or their local hospital. The idea that a veteran in the North Country in midwinter has to go all the way to Boston is absolutely, totally, fundamentally wrong. And I would say, as an Army brat who watched his mother, his sisters, and his father for 27 years, I have a pretty good sense of what military families and veterans families need.
Congressman Paul, would you say that again? Would you use that phrase again?
Yeah, I think people who don't serve when they could and they get 3 or 4 or even 5 deferments aren't. They have no right to send our kids off to war and not be even against the wars that we have. I'm trying to stop the wars, but at least, I went when they called me up. But, the veterans problem is a big one. We have hundreds of thousands coming back from these wars that were undeclared, they were unnecessary, they haven't been won, they're unwinnable. We have hundreds of thousands looking for care. And we have an epidemic of suicide coming back. And so many have, if you add up all the contractors and all the wars going on in Afghanistan and in Iraq, we've lost 8,500 Americans and severe injuries over 40,000. And these are undeclared wars. So Rick keeps saying you don't want this libertarian stuff. But what I'm talking about, I don't bring up the word, you do, but I talk about the Constitution. Constitution has rules, and I don't like it when we send our kids off to fight these wars, and when those individuals didn't go themselves, and then come up and when they're asked, they say, oh, I don't think one person could have made a difference. I have a pet peeve that annoys me to a great deal, because when I see these young men coming back, my heart weeps for them.
Speaker Gingrich.
Well, Dr. Paul has a long history of saying things that are inaccurate and false. The fact is, I never asked for deferment. I was married with a child. It was never a question. My father was, in fact, serving in Vietnam in the Mekong Delta at the time he's referring to. I think I have a pretty good idea of what it's like as a family to worry about your father getting killed, and I personally resent the kind of comments and aspersions he routinely makes without accurate information and then just slurs people with.
I need one quick follow-up. When I was drafting, I was married and had 2 kids, and I went.
I wasn't eligible for the draft.
Congressman Paul, while we're on the subject, though, the Speaker has said that you've had a history of inaccurate statements. There has been quite a bit of controversy over this newsletter that went out under your name, a number of comments that were perceived as racist, as inaccurate.